the National Infusion Manager from Johnson & Johnson, to sort of introduce himself to our group, because he will be viewing our team's presentation tonight on behalf of J&J. And Adam, my apologies, this isn't really working the way you think you would, so if you don't mind, you want to just come up here? You can make use of the mic.
So do I have to talk? I could put, I could probably talk. Can everybody hear me in the back? Okay, perfect. So, yes, my name is Adam Jakovac. I'm here from Janssen Bioadvance. Bioadvance, I'm not sure if anybody here, I think one person in the back probably knows what it is, or a few people, but Bioadvance is a patient support program that we actually run through industry. So ultimately what I am responsible for at Janssen is the National Infusion Network. We have about 250 private infusion centers across Canada where we have about 40,000 patients that visit and manage about 250 infusions and injections per year. So very established program, very complex program, very interesting program. And so I just wanted to say very excited to be here today to actually view some of the work that this fine group here to the left is presenting. And yeah, so that's basically it. And so I just wanted to, what I'm also going to do is I understand that there's going to be a question period at the end, so I'm going to be kind of thinking about some questions to ask the group here as well, in addition to, I guess, the group in the back that's going to be covering a few additional questions. So thanks very much.
All right, so hi everyone. First off, I'd like to ask you, with a show of hands, how many of you would be interested in an app that withdraws money from your bank account every time you press snooze on your alarm? That's what we thought. So we realize this might be an extreme example, but it does show that compliance is a huge issue even outside of healthcare, and that we need to come up with creative solutions to address this issue. So hi everyone, on behalf of my team Schematics, I'd like to welcome you to our talk on improving patient compliance for Simponi. So in case it wasn't clear, our objective throughout our project was to develop a solution to improve patient compliance for Janssen's Simponi. The factors that we took into consideration when determining a solution was that it should be cost neutral with a budget of $200,000, it should be feasible within 2 years, and it should complement the patient support system that's already in place. So to give you a bit of an outline for our talk tonight, first we'll be going over some background information. We'll be talking about TNF-alpha therapies in general, and then Simponi and its competitors. We'll be talking about compliance, both in the context of healthcare and outside of it. And we'll be walking you through our patient survey and our patient interviews. And finally, we'll walk you through our solution. So first, a bit of background on Simponi. Simponi is indicated for 4 inflammatory diseases. First, we have moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis, which is a chronic inflammatory joint disease that primarily affects the wrist and the hands. Then we have active psoriatic arthritis, which is another type of arthritis that is often associated with skin psoriasis, and it mainly affects the large and distal joints. Then we have active ankylosing spondylitis, which is a type of arthritis that primarily affects the spine, and it can lead to severe pain and discomfort. And finally, we have moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, which is a chronic disease of the large intestine, and it leads to an inflamed colon lining with ulcers that can lead to abdominal discomfort. So when treating these diseases, a physician will use something like this pyramid approach, which is based off of the treatment guidelines. So this pyramid approach is for rheumatoid arthritis, but it would be similar for all 4 indications of Simponi. So in general, the more severe the disease is, the more aggressive the treatment is, but that's not true for all patients. You could have 2 patients with the same disease severity that require different treatments. So the physician would start at the bottom and try prescribing analgesics, NSAIDs, or steroids, and then if those don't work, they would try prescribing standard disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, or DMARDs. And then if those don't work, a doctor may prescribe a biologic, like Simponi, and Simponi is also considered a DMARD. So short of surgery, biologics are the most aggressive treatment available, and that's why it's so important that patients and physicians do everything that they can to make this option work. So now a brief overview of how Simponi works. To do that, first we'll go over the role of the cell signaling protein TNF-alpha, since the inflammatory diseases that Simponi is indicated for are all mediated by TNF-alpha. So the main role of TNF-alpha is to regulate immune cells. So in someone healthy, it'll activate B cells, T cells, macrophages, and neutrophils, which will all start secreting cytokines, which will themselves contribute to the inflammatory cascade. So this is all triggered by harmful stimuli like malignancies and infections. So TNF-alpha has a big role in controlling these. But when this cascade is triggered by non-harmful stimuli like your own cells, this can lead to inflammatory disease. So naturally, since TNF-alpha is a protein, one way to control inflammation is by targeting TNF-alpha with antibodies. So these are some of the antibodies that have been developed so far. A big way that these therapies compete against each other is through immunogenicity. So a fully human antibody will have an advantage over a humanized antibody, which will have an advantage over a chimeric antibody. So I'll be pointing these out. So we have infusion therapies and we have subcutaneous injection therapies. So first, by infusion, we have Remicade by Janssen, which is a chimeric human-mouse monoclonal antibody. So the yellow sections here represent the mouse CDRs. Then by subcutaneous injection, we have Humira, which is a fully human antibody that was developed by Phage Display. Then we have Cimzia, which is a humanized antigen-binding fragment of a monoclonal antibody conjugated to PEG. So the red demonstrates that it's humanized. And then finally, we have Enbrel, which is a fully humanized fusion protein, so not technically an antibody. Instead of the variable domain of a monoclonal antibody, the protein contains TNF receptor 2. And then finally, we have Simponi, which will be the focus of this talk. So it's a similar antibody to Humira, but instead of being developed through phage display, it was actually developed by a transgenic mouse that was capable of producing human IgG. So Simponi, or by generic name golimumab, is administered once a month by self-injection. The half-life is 2 weeks, so it's recommended that patients don't take their dose more than 2 weeks late, because at this point, 3 half-lives will have passed since the patient took their last dose, so by this point, a lot of the drug will have been cleared from their system. Now, because the effects of biologics are much more long-term than standard DMARDs, a patient might not notice any symptoms until weeks down the line. So they may have a flare-up, but it could be not until 10 weeks after their missed dose. So it's a lot harder to manage your disease simply by monitoring your symptoms when you're being treated with biologics. So now that we've gone over the scientific background of Simponi, I'm going to pass it over to Mike, who's going to talk about the issue of compliance.
Thank you. So, before we move on, I just want to define a few important terms for our talk this evening. So first we have compliance or adherence, and these terms are actually synonymous, and they can be defined as the degree to which a patient follows the recommendations about day-to-day treatment by the healthcare professional with respect to dosage, timing, and frequency. So essentially what this means is whether or not the patient is following the healthcare professional's recommendations about taking their medications. Another important term is persistence, and this is the time of continuous therapy from initiation to discontinuation of treatment. So essentially what this means is whether or not the patient is taking their medication throughout the duration of time that was set out for them. And so the reason why we bring up compliance or adherence and persistence is because they're very important in the overall clinical outcome of the patient. So it's not important only that the patient is persisting in taking their medication for a set period of time, but they're also compliant with their medication, and they're following the set guidelines for their dosage, timing, and frequency set out by their physician. And then finally, we'll define a patient taking Simponi as compliant if they take 1 dose every month or 12 doses in a year. And then a non-compliant patient will be one who takes a dose greater than a period of 42 days from their last dose, or greater than a period of 1 month and 2 weeks since their last dose. But why should we care about compliance? Why is it important? Well, from the patient perspective, non-compliance is associated with poorer clinical outcomes when compared to compliant patients. In fact, it's been shown that individual risk of disease flare-up is significantly greater in non-adherent patients. And that's somewhat intuitive, because if a patient's not taking their medication as prescribed, they're much more likely to experience symptoms from their disease. This is also relevant for the healthcare system in general, because good compliance will reduce overall healthcare costs. When you look at the individual patient, if they are experiencing less disease symptoms because they're compliant with their medication, they'll spend less time contacting their physician, being in a clinic or a hospital, and therefore they will reduce the overall healthcare costs. Furthermore, it's been estimated that health-related productivity costs are about 2.3 times higher than direct healthcare costs due to noncompliance. And so what this means is that noncompliant patients are costing the healthcare system much more, 2.3 times greater than a compliant patient is. Another estimation is that between 100 and 300 billion of avoidable annual healthcare costs are attributed to noncompliance. And this is an American figure, however, it's still relevant for the Canadian healthcare system. And the main point here is that these costs or these expenditures are avoidable. And that's why compliance is such a huge issue in healthcare today. So compliance comes with an issue of complexity around it. As you can see from this figure, this represents a range between 50 to 80% of patients who are actually adherent to their treatment, and these are chronic patients. And unfortunately, this is likely an overestimation because patients who are enrolled in a clinical study will be more likely to adhere to their treatment regimen. You'll also notice that it's a wide range between 50 to 80. And the main reason behind this is because compliance rates will differ depending on the method of measurement. So an extreme example of this is that patients taking Enbrel, which is a competing medication for Simponi, they had a 27% compliant rate in one study, and yet in a completely different study, a 70% compliant rate. So the main reason behind this is that it's due to the method of measurement. And the authors who conducted the study with the 27% rate, they're much more exclusive in what they define a patient as compliant. And that's in compared to the 70% compliant study. So again, this is an issue of complexity because there's not one way to accurately measure compliance. So what's available currently for patients? Well, we have the BioAdvance program. This is available not only to Simponi patients, but also Remicade and Celera patients who are, which are also Janssen products. Currently in Canada, there's around 25,000 patients who are enrolled, and there are 85 BioAdvance coordinators who organize the personalized support and features of this program. You can see the exhaustive list of the features here, but patients have access to a 24-hour website, 24-hour hotline, a website. There's a referral program for support groups. There's a reminder system. You can have your medication delivered to you at home, and you can even schedule a nurse to come and actually administer your medication for you. So the rest is listed here. But Janssen has also invested in a Care for Today mobile app, where patients can receive reminders, you can track your compliance and overall quality of life through this mobile app. And so, long story short, there's already a great support system available to these patients, and so it was our job to improve upon this and maybe provide a new solution. And so we also wanted to make sure that our solution was applicable and fit well within the current solution of BioAdvance. And so that led to our approach. And so we wanted to make sure all three gears would fit so they would turn properly. So we started out with a research-based approach where we looked at the literature of overall noncompliance. We then moved into an out-of-healthcare example, such that it was an innovative approach to solving this issue. And then we looked at the individual patient to provide the patient perspective for reasons of noncompliance. And so with that being said, I'll pass it on to Christina, who will discuss the literature.
So as Mike mentioned earlier, only 50 to 80% of patients are actually adherent to their medication, and these are the reasons why. We found that the reasons were the same regardless of disease and treatment type, and can be broken down into unintentional and intentional reasons. So unintentional reasons occur when the patient intends to take their medication but is prevented from doing so in some way. So this could be because they forgot, likely due to a busy lifestyle, because they ran out of medication, they were away from home at the time of their dosage, or they had problems with the health system environment, so such as scheduling appointments, a poor relationship with their doctor, or issues ordering and picking up medication from the pharmacy. Cost and insurance coverage also play a large role in whether the patient is adherent or not. Intentional reasons occur when the patient makes a conscious decision not to take their medication. And this can be because they're feeling depressed, have a lack of motivation, or they may be feeling good. They may feel like they don't need their medication at this point. They may have false health beliefs, likely resulting from a lack of education or support, and these false health beliefs can lead to a fear of side effects or a perceived lack of efficacy. So as you can see, there's no one reason that causes non-compliance. So in coming up with our own solution to improve compliance, we tried to address as many of these issues as possible. So there are some compliance issues that are specific to TNF-alpha inhibitors, and some factors associated with poor compliance include a perceived lack of efficacy. Now, a lack of efficacy is a common reason for discontinuation of a specific biologic and switching to a different treatment. However, what's interesting is that one study found that although 40% of patients stated a lack of efficacy as the top reason for discontinuing their certain biologic, only 12% of patients stated that their symptoms actually worsened. So this may not be an issue of an actual lack of efficacy, but more of a lack of education or false health beliefs, and these are things that we can address. Another reason for poor compliance may be injection issues, so anxiety surrounding self-injection or a fear of needles, and these issues can be easily addressed with something such as a support program. On the other hand, some factors that are associated with good compliance include previous biologic use. So this makes sense since patients that are experienced with biologics have likely overcome their anxiety of self-injection and their fear of needles. Another factor for good compliance would be the infusion route of administration. And an example of this would be Remicade. So Remicade is a sort of best-in-class example for compliance with TNF-alpha inhibitors. And why is it the best-in-class example? Well, patients are required to go into a clinic to receive their medication. This means that they're receiving phone call reminders from the clinic reminding them of exactly when their appointment is. They may develop a personal relationship with the clinic coordinator. They may even schedule infusion dates with their friends, and this introduces a social aspect to administering medication. So there are some factors associated with good compliance that are general across healthcare, so regardless of disease and treatment type. The first being support. So one-on-one counseling or support groups can address anxiety and depression and also increase motivation. So patients that are more effectively motivated are more likely to have good compliance. Motivation can also be increased with an increase in education. So in education about the disease and the treatment can also improve compliance. Patients must be able to understand a clear link between the treatment and the disease in order for them to want to take their medication. Education is also important to develop good health beliefs, so patients should believe that the medication is going to be beneficial to them and improve their disease states. Patients should also believe that there's a risk to not complying to their medication or treatment. Communication with the healthcare provider is also important to establishing good health beliefs. So if the patient communicates well with the doctor can then understand from a patient's perspective their views on health beliefs and either reinforce them or correct them. Patients that play a more active role in their treatment have also been shown to have better compliance. So rather than just being told what to do by the physician, if the patient participates, is engaged, collaborates, maybe even comes to compromise on treatment decisions with the physician, they're more likely to adhere to therapy. So as you can see, all of these factors sort of tie into one another and in turn lead to good compliance. So in coming up with our own solution to improve compliance, we try to incorporate as many of these factors as possible. So what did we learn from reviewing the literature? Well, we learned that there's no one method that improves compliance better than another, likely due to the many variables at play involving compliance and the fact that there's no single variable that consistently predicts compliance. So it would be best to use a combination of strategies that addresses multiple reasons for noncompliance, such as anxiety and forgetfulness, and incorporates a number of factors related to good compliance, so a support group, motivation, and good communication. In addition, since the reasons for noncompliance often vary from patient to patient, a personalized compliance plan would be best, one that's tailored to the individual patient in some way. So after reviewing the literature to see what's already been discovered about compliance, we looked at some compliance strategies outside of healthcare in technology, fitness, and other aspects of our everyday lives in order to gain inspiration for an innovative solution that's brand new to healthcare. So one of the things we looked at was going to the gym. How do we keep up with our fitness routine? Well, we may have a workout buddy, one that supports us, motivates us, and holds us accountable when we don't show up for our workout. Often joining a large fitness group is a little too intimidating, but having a workout buddy provides the perfect amount of support. Alcoholics Anonymous uses a sponsorship program in which a recovering alcoholic sponsors someone who's new to the program and provides them with advice, a shared experience, and again, motivation. So this is a two-way street. The sponsor gains just as much from the situation as the sponsee does. For dentist appointments, we often receive a phone call or a text maybe from the dentist office reminding us of those appointments that only happen a couple times a year and are easy to forget. Why do we keep going back to the same hairdresser? Well, we've built a personal relationship with them and we feel comfortable with them. So of all the examples we looked at outside of healthcare, which were many more than what's shown here, there were the same few underlying themes. And these included a personal support system, a shared experience, accountability, motivation, and a reminder system. So in coming up with our own solution to improve compliance, we kept these underlying themes in mind. So now we're going to switch gears and take a patient's perspective. We conducted surveys and interviews of patients and a rheumatologist in order to understand the issues of noncompliance through the eyes of a patient, and Chris is going to take you through these results.
So after going through the literature, the next thing we wanted to do was really gain a patient's perspective and understand their unique needs and concerns surrounding taking their medication. So we surveyed 189 patients that were currently using some form of medication to treat one of the conditions indicated for Simponi. Now, of those 189 patients, 111 were currently using biologics as a form of therapy. Now, if we remember back to the literature, it stated that infusion-based therapies had a higher compliance rate amongst patients compared to subcutaneous therapies, and we wanted to ensure that this was reflected in our data set. So we compared the values, or the number of people reporting that they had missed or never missed a dose between these two groups. And as you can see highlighted in bold at the top, there is over 8% greater frequency of patients reporting that they had never missed a dose on an infusion-based therapy as compared to a subcutaneous therapy, overall demonstrating that our data does reflect what's in the literature. But what about the patients that did miss a dose? Well, we looked at the most common reasons for missing a dose and looked at the frequency of patients reporting each of them. And the thing that stood out the most to us, as you can see highlighted in red at the bottom, is anxiety. As you can see, 11.2% of patients reported anxiety as being a reason for missing a dose on a subcutaneous therapy, but not one patient reported this as being a reason on an infusion-based therapy, which could be attributed to that shared experience that patients on infusion-based therapies get by going to the clinic. Now, the data that I've presented here is really how you would typically see this compliance data analyzed. But what would happen if we analyzed it a different way? Perhaps we could find something that a lot of companies have been overlooking. So we decided to focus in specifically on the patients taking subcutaneous therapies, and we divided them up amongst age groups. Now, when we do this, we can start to see some interesting trends start to emerge. Particularly, we see forgetfulness show up, with 20% of patients between the ages of 18 to 30 reporting this as being a reason for missing a dose. And again, we see anxiety show up, which, if you remember from the previous slide, was a reason unique to patients on subcutaneous therapies. Here we can see that 15% of patients report this as being a reason for missing a dose, specifically between the ages of 18 to 30. So taken all together, by looking at the data this way, we can see that anxiety and forgetfulness are primary reasons for missing a dose, particularly at those early ages of 18 to 30. So when we looked at this data, we hypothesized that perhaps a lot of these reasons could be addressed by some form of patient support group. So we asked our patients in the survey, would you be interested in a patient support group? Now, we know each of the conditions indicated for Simponi are unique, and that a patient with rheumatoid arthritis will have unique concerns and considerations compared to somebody with ulcerative colitis. So we divided up the responses based off of each of these disease groups. As you can see, 60% of patients with rheumatoid arthritis reported being in favor of a support group, 62% with ankylosing spondylitis, 67% with psoriatic arthritis, and 54% with ulcerative colitis. Taken all together, if we average these values out, we get approximately 60% of patients are in favor of a patient support program regardless of their indication. Now, this 60% is important to remember as it comes up later in our financial model. Now, all these statistics are great, but the thing that really drove the point home for us were the comments that patients were leaving us in our survey. So here are a few examples of the ones we pulled. So these were unprompted responses that we got from patients. One said, "It is intrusive to have to go out and join a group, though I agree that social support can help." Another patient said, "A lot of doctors don't believe how you feel and don't want to listen to your concerns." And lastly, patient support groups can be a very effective way of eliminating patient fears. So again, these were great in that they really re-emphasized or confirmed the notion that patient support groups can be used as a method to address some of the underlying conditions behind patient non-adherence. So after we gained this patient's perspective, the next thing we wanted to do was to gain the perspective of a healthcare specialist. So we spoke to the healthcare specialist in rheumatology, Dr. Ed Keystone. So Dr. Keystone, aside from being a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto, is also a senior consultant in rheumatology at Mount Sinai Hospital. He's the director of the Rebecca McDonald Center for Arthritis and Autoimmune Disease and the director of the Division of Advanced Therapeutics and Arthritis. He's the author of over 200 peer-reviewed papers and book chapters and the recipient of numerous awards throughout his career, including the Senior Investigator Award from the Canadian Rheumatology Association and the American College of Rheumatology's Grand Master Award. So speaking with Dr. Keystone, he emphasized two key features of compliance, the first being a strong physician-patient relationship, emphasizing that it should be honest, personable, and well-informed. He also stressed education, stating that a physician should really take the time to explain to their patient the importance of taking their medication and the long-term consequences of failing to do so. On our topic of patient support systems, he said that a system really separates itself from the other ones when the company is capable of showing what it's willing to do to go above and beyond for their patient. So now that we've expanded our insight, Emily will now take us through a summary of our findings and our proposed solution.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so putting our three gears together, we learned that anxiety and forgetfulness are the most common reasons for noncompliance. Subcutaneous patients demonstrated worse compliance than patients with infusion-based therapies. So it's no surprise that anxiety over self-injection is more relevant in this patient group who are using sub-Q treatments. So our research and survey results suggest that infusion patients enjoy the shared experience offered by attending those regular scheduled appointments at their infusion clinics, so thereby reducing the overall reported level of anxiety. Sub-Q patients do not have this opportunity to necessarily partake in this shared experience. So within the sub-Q group, anxiety was most prevalent in the 18 to 30 age group. So imagine for a second, you were just recently diagnosed with a chronic, debilitating illness, such as rheumatoid arthritis, at the age that you are right now. Would you have a hard time accepting the fact that you'll have this illness and potentially be taking a biologic for the rest of your life? And more importantly, would you feel comfortable at the age you are right now joining a large public patient support group such as one on Facebook or in person where most of the members are over the age of 50? So I know for me personally, this would seem as a pretty intimidating experience. We also noticed forgetfulness as a number one reason for noncompliance, where 25% of patients actually reported this as their number one reason. So with all the patient support programs and reminder systems that all companies are putting in place right now, why is forgetfulness still the number one issue? Perhaps having an automated text message reminder or an automated phone call or email once a month isn't really giving them that motivation or shared experience that they need to really tackle their treatment guidelines. So we kept anxiety and forgetfulness as the center of our solution, which is the Simponi Sidekick program. So inspired by the successful Alcoholics Anonymous sponsorship program, the Simponi Sidekick program facilitates a personal, one-on-one relationship to connect similar patients. So they could be connected in terms of their age, their sex, disease background, as well as personal interests, something that the AA sponsorship program does. So although the program would be open to all new and existing users, we believe that the target age group should be patients falling between the ages of 18 and 30. So again, this program would be open to all Simponi patients, but we do think that Janssen has overlooked the unique opportunity to address this age group. One of the more attractive features of this program is that it can be easily integrated into the existing BioAdvance system. Not only will this system be extremely user-friendly, but we believe it will provide Janssen with a competitive edge. Nervous patients new to a biologic therapy may be more inclined to choose Simponi over other options, knowing that they'd have that shared experience of taking their drug with a sidekick. Moreover, we know from speaking to our key opinion leader that physicians are more attracted to patient support programs that noticeably go above and beyond for their patients. So I want to quickly walk you through our vision for the Simponi Sidekick program. It would all start with a physician
patient visit where an experienced Simponi user, perhaps using the drug for at least 6 months, who's shown good compliance and responding well to their treatment, would be introduced to the program. If they agree to become a sidekick, they'd be given an enrollment form specifically, aside from BioAdvance, to enroll in the SSP. They'd also be given an educational pamphlet that would kind of give them some details of the disease and Simponi so that they overall feel a little bit more confident talking about their drug, which would reduce the spread of potentially false health beliefs later on in the system. Moreover, it would give an overview of the program objective and expectations for them as a sidekick. So then we'd have another physician visit with a new Simponi patient that would be encouraged to enroll in this program at the same time that they're encouraged to enroll in BioAdvance. Again, they'd be given a patient enrollment form. These forms would be implemented into the BioAdvance system, and patients would be matched up based on some of their answers to the questions. So now we have a match. What do we expect out of this relationship between a sidekick and the mentee, I guess we could call them? Well, we want patients to build a relationship in a way that they feel most comfortable, just in the same way that an AA sponsor would build a relationship with their sponsee. So one of the great features we think could be integrated into this program is that patients could be put on a similar dosing schedule. So the new patient would start taking their drug at the same time as their sidekick, so that way we tackle the issue of forgetfulness, because they'd have a motivating personal reminder system by communicating on a fairly frequent basis about their experience taking their drug, managing their disease, and when it's time to take their next dose. We also think there's an opportunity for Janssen to potentially sponsor local events where sidekicks can meet with each other, as well as meet with other people in the program to add more of a personal aspect. So this is just an example of some of the questions that would be asked on an enrollment form. This could be easily integrated into the existing form patients fill out when entering the BioAdvance program. They'd fill out the indication that they're taking Simponi for, as well as their experience on Simponi, and how they would like to be contacted, just so the relationship building process is a little less intrusive. We also think it would be neat and kind of unique to healthcare to include a section on the form that looks at patients on more of an individual basis. Just like AA, they have a chance to be matched based on their personal interests, so they feel even more familiar with their sidekick. So we ran this idea by the same patients who filled out our survey and asked for some of their feedback. So when asked if they'd be willing to join the SSP, we got positive feedback. Patients thought that this one-on-one support system would be very beneficial. We also asked patients, if, as existing biologic users, if they would be interested in actually acting as that sidekick mentor if starting the program. 93% of our patients said yes, and also provided positive feedback. Again, we also ran this idea by Dr. Keystone, who said, "To my knowledge, there hasn't been anything like this. I really like the idea. There is a need for a program like this for my patients under the age of 40, because he worries about compliance most with this age group." So hopefully at this point, you have been convinced of the potential need for our solution. Education, continued efficacy, and safety are the biggest benefits to increasing patient compliance with a biologic. Although you can't quantify these true benefits of increasing compliance, we would like to address the investment needed in order to realize our vision. So right now I'm going to pass it off to Cindy, who is going to walk you through our cost-neutral model.
Since we are presenting a solution based on compliance, the first question we asked ourselves is how many patients are currently compliant? A study conducted in 2015 estimates that 77% of current Simponi users are compliant. Thus, we will be using this percentage as our base compliance rate. The next number we needed to know is the percentage of patients who will be willing to join our program. For this number, we refer back to our survey results. We took the average across all disease indications and came out with 60%. So we assumed that 60% will be the adoption rate for the Simponi Sidekick program. From there, we now need an estimation of how much our program is able to increase compliance. A study conducted on a similar program for smoking found that this type of program is able to increase compliance up to 15%. To remain conservative, we will be using a 10% increase as an estimate for our model. And finally, going back to our And finally, going back to our definitions, compliance is defined as 12 doses per year, and non-compliance is defined as 8 or less than 8 doses per year. Using these definitions, we assume that a patient who went from being non-compliant to compliant will go from taking 8 doses to 12 doses per year. So in order to clearly explain the financial model, I will first be taking everyone through our thought process. We understand that not all patients will be willing to enroll in a support program, so the first thing we did was separate the patient into 2 different groups. One group is known as the Simponi Psychic Program Group, or the SSP group, and the other one is known as the non-adopters. From there, we looked at only the SSP group and calculated the base number of patients who will be compliant based on current compliance rate. Then we calculated the increase in compliance due to the implementation of the Simponi Psychic program. So now we're going to go through the exact same process, but with numbers. Based on growth predictions, there will be 784 new Simponi users in Canada for 2016. Out of these 784 new users, 60% of them will enroll in the Simponi Psychic program. This means that there will be 470 new Simponi users enrolled in the Simponi Psychic program in its first year of implementation. Now, the current compliance rate for Simponi is at 77%, and we believe our project is able to increase this compliance rate by 10%. So this means that the compliance rate for the patients enrolled in SSP will be 87%. And now we're going to times the 470 new Simponi users by the additional 10% increase in compliance and get 47. This 47 means that there are going to be 47 additional patients enrolled in SSP who will become compliant. Now, for every one of these 47 patients, they will go from taking 8 doses a year to 12 doses a year. So we're going to times 47 by the 4 additional doses they're going to take and get 188 additional doses. And now we're going to finish off the financial model in terms of money. So each dose of Simponi costs approximately $1,442. So we're going to times that 188 additional dose by the 1,442 and get a total of $271,096. What does this number mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, with a budget of $200,000, this means that the Simponi Psychic program will break even in its first year of implementation. So now we're going to conclude by going back and reviewing what we have learned. Team Schematics was presented with the problem, can we improve patient compliance for Simponi? In order to address this problem, we looked at literature and found that anxiety over self-injection and forgetfulness are top reasons for non-compliance. In addition, we also found that solutions to improve compliance need to be tailored to individual patients and feature a combination of support, motivation, and education. Next, we went out of healthcare to look at best-in-class examples of programs that increase compliance, such as Alcoholics Anonymous. We found that these examples all had a common theme of a one-on-one support system that formed personal relationships in order to provide motivation and support. Lastly, from our patient survey, we identified a high prevalence of anxiety and forgetfulness in the 18 to 30 age group, so we chose that as our target market. We then went back to our key opinion leader and patients and presented them with our idea and looked for their opinion. Both parties confirmed the need to address this target age group, and it showed high interest in one particular idea. So taking all these factors into account, we came up with our solution. We recommend the Simponi Psychic program as a cost-neutral solution that is complementary to the already well-established BioAdvance program. The Simponi Psychic program is an effective method of improving compliance with the ultimate goals of increased safety and efficacy in patients taking Simponi. Finally, the SSP is a simple program that targets an unaddressed age group and is well received by both patients and physicians. So on behalf of Schematics, we would like to thank our supervisor, Dr. Jason Parker, as well as our mentor team, Cardiana Consulting, for their help and guidance on our project. In addition, we would also like to thank the following patient societies, as well as all patients who completed our survey. And finally, we would like to give a special thank you to the following individuals: Dr. Edward Keystone, Krista Snow, Linda Wellhelm, Dr. Don Richards, Michael Mallison, and Marilyn Walsh. On behalf of Schematics, we thank you for listening to our presentation.
Test.
Was that good?
So folks, we're going to conduct our question period, but just in the interest of time, the gun deck is going to hold their guns in place, and I've asked Adam, because he's not going to be with us for much longer, to open up the question period.
Okay, thank you very much. So first off, thanks very much for that great presentation. I thought it was really good to introduce the survey results and get some actual sort of data from the field within the survey itself, because it lends to the credibility around what you're really talking about as opposed to just what's published. So that was a good step in there. So my question is really around, it's around the scalability. So I like the approach here, the one-on-one personal relationship. Then what I start to look at is, how do you roll this out? So from a scalability perspective, knowing that a physician may only see their patient one time per year, so with their specialist, how would you go, what are the first key steps that you would actually do to try and implement something like this?
Yeah, so definitely if a physician was aware of the program and they saw that unmet need, they would talk about it. We also thought, since patients do have more regular contact with their assigned bioadvance coordinator, that could be a good channel to kind of convey or advertise the features of this program. So we think actually through the bioadvance coordinator would probably be a way that the word of the program spread the most. The big thing is we want to get new patients because they're already going through that process of enrolling in BioAdvance. We think it would be really easy to get them entering the program, get their information into the database. But in terms of securing those mentors, it would really be through the visits with the physician and BioAdvance coordinator.
Okay, so you're kind of defaulting to the BioAdvance coordinator as part of the kind of resource of the engine behind it,
Yeah.
so that they could target the physicians. Because ultimately, when you're talking about it, there's over 1,000 physicians across coast to coast, so trying to figure out, and there's about 100 BioAdvance coordinators.
Yeah, so definitely through the forms that are already in the office, like the assistant of Dr. Keystone, who we spoke to, she said she's in charge of talking necessarily to the patients that after speaking to the doctor, they move into the office, talk about BioAdvance with her, and that's where all the paperwork gets done. So we feel that that would be like the key place that interaction or that enrollment is made.
Okay. You mentioned that there was from your survey, there was about a 60% that were going to adopt or be interested in actually pursuing the SCC program, SSP. Okay. Regardless, what I'm also interested in, what are your thoughts on the other 40%? So ultimately, when you're looking at a program for compliance, you're looking at the whole patient population. So
Right.
Whereas it's really good to focus in on one area, what would you do in the other area to also make it a little bit more sustainable and value added at the end of the day?
Well, currently there's no incentive program. We didn't come up with an incentive program to encourage mentees to be involved in this program. So one way that you could address that would by maybe incentivizing being a mentor in some way. I'm not sure specifically how we go about doing that, but that's one way to increase, I guess, patient involvement in the program. So that's
When we did pose that question, if people were interested in the patient support program, kind of the traditional belief about it is that you're going into a group of like 3,000 people, and that's kind of what everyone understands patient support to be. If we look at the Facebook communities, there's over 10,000 people. The local patient support groups have 50 people in them. So I think the 60% of people who did answer yes were the ones that kind of think of patient support as being a big group. But we imagine the number could actually increase if it was explained to them as like a one-on-one support system. We just use that to be conservative in our model for people who are at least interested in interacting with other patients. Like it would be posed to everyone. And if, there's little responsibility, just like being an AA sponsor. Like everyone who usually goes through the program becomes a sponsor eventually themselves, gives back, and the cycle keeps going. So
Yeah, and we've heard that from our Remicade patients that even without incentive, they're happy to provide feedback.
Yeah. So I think if it was the idea of support was reframed in a way where it wasn't, do you want to join a group of 10,000 people or go have a weekly meeting with 50 people and talk about your experience, the adoption rate might even be higher to promote it as like a one-on-one sponsor program.
Okay. Last question, so measures of success. So obviously you have a financial portion, but what elements of qualitative success, what is success from a qualitative point of view as well as a quantitative point of view under your proposed solution?
Okay, so in terms of qualitative, we believe that for a patient, like money is definitely not the only thing they consider when they look at a treatment. In addition, we also hope that our program will be able to increase the patient's knowledge of the drug and especially knowledge about compliance of the drug. So currently, not a lot of patients know like when would a missed dose be, and we also address this. And when we went to pharmacists with this question, they also don't really know like the specific definition of compliance for Simponi. So we hope that by implementing a program where you have one-on-one education, the patients will be able to gain a better understanding of their disease as well as the treatment.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so on gun deck tonight is Fit Bios. So guys, this is just picking up our weight for recording purposes, but as you've noticed, it's not projecting. Okay, so any order you prefer, guys, okay?
Congratulations. I think you guys did a lot of research, and that's great. Thank you. So my question is around the patient age group that you guys picked. So I remember in that PowerPoint slide, I saw a lot of percentages, but in terms of absolute numbers, how many patients actually fall into that age group of 18 to 30? Is that a small percent of the total number of patients? If that's so, why don't you guys try to target a different age group?
Yeah, so in terms of, do you mean, what's the slide number?
They're down there.
Oh.
Scroll through.
Right, so do you mean in terms of like our survey response and which patient, or how many patients for each?
Yeah, so it's a survey, but in terms of how many patients are on this drug, is this survey representative of the number of the age groups of patients who are on this drug?
In terms,
So what I'm asking is how many patients who are taking this drug are aged between 18 and 30, and how many are older?
Oh, I see. I have to double check in terms of what we actually got from our survey response, but we believe that what's here is indicative of what is really available out there in terms of like across appointments. So again, it's more disease specific than what we're looking for. So particularly if you're looking at something like rheumatoid arthritis, they would have a higher average age, and then for the other indications, it would be lower. But in terms of for Simponi specifically, we're not too sure. We had a very small sample size in terms of how many specifically on Simponi for these conditions.
Okay. That's just because you guys also said that your concern around patients wanting to join the support group. You guys said that in support groups there are a lot of people who are older. So if the patient demographics is a bit older for this indication, then it might be better to target age group.
Yeah, absolutely. So there definitely is I don't think this is completely representative of what's out there because it was a survey done online. So there probably is a slightly higher percentage of younger patients in the survey results than what would be representative of all the patients taking this drug. But as we mentioned, it's more, we're not just targeting the younger patients. It would be open to anyone. We just kind of expect that there'll be more response from the younger group because of the reasons that they outlined in the survey, saying that forgetfulness and anxiety were the number one reasons for missing a dose. But that doesn't mean that the older patients that also have those reasons couldn't benefit from the program too. So it's more that we just expect that younger group to be more responsive, not that anyone cannot join.
I'll just add on to that quickly. A survey result that we didn't necessarily show everything was we found in the patients that were 18 to 30, we asked if they were interested in a support group as well as are you already part of one? And a lot of them weren't part of one. And that was kind of a point that I brought up in introducing the program, is that it's almost too intimidating or intrusive when you're someone who's our age to go and join a bigger group. So although they might not report that they're actually part of a group or they're interested, they might just have that like false perception that support means something a lot bigger than what this program's actually suggesting. So we think the interest could be actually quite a bit bigger if they knew that it was one-on-one.
All right, thanks for your talk, guys. Really well done research. So the question I have is around your survey, and did you stratify your survey based on the dosing schedule of each of the patients? Because you did mention that Enbrel is once every week versus Simponi is once a week, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking that forgetfulness might be a bigger of issue for someone who has to do it once a week versus someone who has to do it once a month.
So that may be true, and there's been a lot of published literature on forgetfulness. It is one of the biggest reasons for non-compliance. However, there's a lot of conflicting literature as well. So there's some studies that say fewer times a week has better compliance. Some say a longer time between dosages has better compliance. So I don't think we actually stratified according to that, because forgetfulness is really a big issue regardless of disease and regardless of treatment type.
So do you think it would make a difference if you did stratify, say, would patients who had to take it once a month be less forgetful than patients who had to take it once a week?
Well, actually what we found is that patients who have to take their dose only once a month are actually more forgetful because it's not within their regular routine. So patients who, like we said, have to go in for an infusion, they schedule it in their actual calendar. They might book the same appointment time as a friend and actually have that as part of their more so of a day-to-day activity instead of patients who have to self-administer their medication. So patients who have to do this once a month, it's more of an issue of forgetfulness than anything. So.
Hey guys, really good job. So my question is kind of regarding the timeline of your solution. So just when patients get diagnosed and they start on therapy and they sign up for all these things, I'm assuming that compliance is especially high and that they probably become less compliant over time. So this kind of goes back to the question about incentive. So are you guys, did you kind of make a timeline for this and see how long those mentors are going to be with the mentees? Or like you're not providing any incentives, so how do you kind of expect people to go about doing this in the long term?
I think we actually found, again, a lot of conflicting results, but when people are first starting out therapy, they may not actually be that compliant just because they're not familiar with the type of treatment. So, anxiety around injection issues can occur at the beginning, and then they're more likely to put off their dosing. Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
I was just kind of wondering that, like, over time.
Oh, and incentives. Okay. And so we have it as an informal relationship. So it's not like a big responsibility. It's more like they may become friends or something like that. So it could just be texting relationship, and you sort of keep in touch with your sidekick that way. So we found that a lot of patients were actually really eager to join, as you saw from all the quotes, a support system. So we don't think that there needs to be a huge incentive in place for people to actually carry out this program and for it to be effective.
Thank you. Did you guys look at chat rooms and stuff like that? in terms of
Like
support?
Facebook groups, and lots of people had positive feedback. So a lot of the quotes from there are from Facebook groups, or again from our survey where we just said, do you have any comments surrounding compliance and surrounding like taking your drug? And a lot of the time social support groups did come up just unprompted. So.
Did you mean chat rooms like as part of the program?
No, not as
Oh,
part
okay.
of
Okay, 'cause
already
we actually-
existing chat rooms that people are part of. And
Okay, yeah,
mentoring
so-
within that area.
Mhm.
Yeah, so pretty much as Christina said, we just looked at the Facebook groups, but we did also think about maybe including the mobile app Care for Today and having some kind of way that patients can communicate on there too. So sort of like a chat room on there too.
Right, good presentation. I was wondering if there's any liability with designating someone as a mentor for Janssen, because if you're giving someone materials to teach someone else and they're only seeing their physician once a year, is there any fallback if they give false information and it kind of affects the other patient?
Yeah, so we definitely took that into consideration. That was one of the comments, really the only issue that Dr. Keystone had with our idea as well. And the way we discussed it with him was that if you look at the overwhelming amount of communication that goes on in the Facebook groups already, if someone wants to spread a false health belief as is and tie it to a drug name, it's already being done, and you can't really control people once they go out. Now, in terms of what would actually be put on paper when enrolling in the Sidekick program, how do you go to the slides in the appendix? Which one? The last one? Oh, okay, perfect. Look at it. We did take a look at what kind of the legal section of the BioAdvance form is. It's in a box there, and it basically just says that they permit to give their name and contact information to their BioAdvance coordinator, and they can use that in any way that they see best benefits their treatment. So we'd obviously have to include another stipulation if they were signing up for this program, and it would basically, the only piece of information that would be shared between patients is just their name and contact information. Everything else that the patient just decides to discuss about their own treatment and managing their conditions or health beliefs is up to them outside of that. They're really just given a phone number or an email address of someone, so they can't really be held accountable for what they talk about. That educational pamphlet is really just to outline the program and the expectations, and they would know that they are defaulted to go back to their BioAdvance coordinator if it gets out of scope of what they're supposed to be talking about with their patient.
Isn't it a bit different if Janssen approaches them and tells them that they should be a mentor? Like if they give them the tools to teach someone else? Even if it's just like the generic pamphlet, because probably no one reads them, or a majority of people don't read them all the way through.
Yeah, so
It's easy to make that mistake.
yeah, so do you want to say something else?
So we also think that the physician would sort of be like screening the mentors before they sign up for the program. So a physician wouldn't recommend someone who has poor compliance or false health beliefs surrounding the medication. And then, yes, we did realize there's legal considerations. So perhaps BioAdvance would have to put something in place that would say anything that the Sidekick, any information regarding the drug or the disease isn't like a responsibility of Janssen. Something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Hi guys, great talk. My question is to do with segmenting the market. So you kind of already talked about the age segmentation, and then Lydia and Josh asked a few questions about that. Mine's more about the indication. So you did mention there's 4 different indications. There are probably a really wide variety of people with different concerns. Are you sure that they all have the same issues with compliance? Is it all forgetfulness and anxiety for all of them? And is it forgetfulness and anxiety for the same reasons?
So as far as anxiety goes, we did specify in our survey that it was specifically surrounding like a fear of self-injection. So it was a lot of them taking their own, or taking a needle and giving it to themselves. As far as forgetfulness, I mean, there's multiple reasons, but we really hope that just how dynamic our system should be able to cover a wide variety of reasons. So we targeted these 2 as being outstanding reasons, but we do hope that having a partner in this process would help to address multiple reasons.
Okay, the reason I ask is because, I mean, with RA, you do have women who are generally older.
Mm-hmm.
or with other indications, you have like the 18 to 30-year-olds, and they do have different preferences for being part of these groups and how they want to communicate. So I'm just wondering if you're going to have a 65-year-old woman who wants to email her best bud to schedule dosing. You know, it just seems a little bit unrealistic for some age groups.
Yeah, so, sorry. So that's actually one of the things that we thought was really good about this program, was that it could be personalized, because you would match people who are similar. So if there was a 65-year-old woman who wanted to email, she would be matched with someone also in that age group, probably who also prefers to email. And those two people would have kind of similar preferences, and that way the relationship could just be built for however they want it to work for them.
All right, and one more question. Can I see the cost breakdown for what you're going to be spending your money on?
So most of it would just be towards salaries for the people who would be managing the matching system, and then perhaps those Janssen-sponsored events that we thought might be a good implementation.
And the reason data storage is at 0, we know that it's a very big component of implementation of a program, but the reason why it's 0 is because we hope that when BioAdvance incorporates the Simponi Sidekick program into itself, it would just add on to the patient data that's already there.
All right, thanks.
And if you want to ask more questions, you can. There's still a few more minutes before we open it up to the floor.
I was wondering how many doses are ordered simultaneously? Like, do you order one a month or like 3 at a time?
Yeah, it's just one a month.
One a month?
Yeah. So you usually pick it up at the pharmacy a couple days before you're scheduled to take it.
How long can you have it for? Like in your fridge or whatever?
Couple weeks, we believe.
Hey guys, so I was just wondering how you're planning on training the physicians to do all of this, to talk to the patients and tell them about the program?
Well, this should be part of their sort of regular practice, as Ed Keystone was telling us, that a good patient-physician relationship based on good communication is really important to the patient being compliant. So it wouldn't be too much work for the physician. It would really fit right in to what they should already be doing. And then we feel that physicians would be very supportive of this program, since they like to see that companies are showing an interest in the patient. So they would be likely to just recommend it. And then a lot of the work would be their secretary or something who's providing the information. But again, it would be provided along with the BioAdvance information and other Simponi information. So it's already something that they're doing.
Okay, but I have a question about your cost analysis. So you said that the 47 patients will go from 8 doses to 12 doses if they're compliant. But wasn't your definition that they're only non-compliant if they're less than 8? So isn't everything between 8 and 12 already compliant?
That is indeed our definition of compliance and non-compliance. However, for the simplicity, in order to build a model upon that definition, we assumed, and it was in our assumption slide, that a patient who goes from being non-compliant to compliant goes from 8 doses to 12 doses.
But a person on 8 doses is already compliant.
8 doses, no. So the definition of non-compliance is a person who takes 8 or less than 8 doses per year.
And is that, so you sourced the product monograph, so is that in the product monograph, or how did you come up with your definition of 8 doses is non-compliant?
In the product monograph, it doesn't source, or it doesn't define non-compliant as 42 days, a greater than 42-day period. But patients are often given a leaflet that if they're within 2 weeks, if they take their dosage within 2 weeks of their scheduled dose, they no longer have to change their dosing regimen. But if they fall without or outside of that range, then they have to contact their physician and reevaluate the situation.
Okay,
So
how does that translate to 8 doses?
Just on a annual scale.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 divided by 42. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a slide where you were defining compliance. non-compliance, what did compliance mean once a month or 12 doses per year? So you just said 8 doses.
Yeah, so, okay, so, so compliance was defined as, we defined it, I guess, as 12 doses a year, so once a month. But I mean, really, that would be anything higher than 8. So between 9 and 12 would be compliant, 8 and under would be non-compliant. Does that make sense?
So we kind of built this definition off of what is said in the product monograph because we needed a way to quantify it in terms of like a transition for our model. So 1 dose every month obviously would equal 12 doses a year. And you have a week plus that kind of leeway of 2 weeks to still be considered compliant based on the product monograph and the information that's given to them. So we translated that into 42 days, 28 days plus that 2 weeks is 42. So if you take 365 and divide it by 42, you would get 8. So just in terms of putting a number to non-compliance, for simplicity, we just turned it into, if you're taking 8 or less doses a year, technically, if you go back to the product monograph, you're being more than 2 weeks late.
Thanks. Thank you, Gun Dec. We'll open it up to the floor.
Hi guys, good job. So Simponi is also available as an infusion, so an IV injection. And I guess the main barriers to non-adherence that you're trying to overcome are anxiety and forgetfulness and fear of self-injection. So the IV route of administration is indicated for rheumatoid arthritis patients. So you said that infusion clinics kind of, people make buddy dates to go and get infusions together, and there's a whole support system there. They wouldn't be at risk of forgetting their injection because there's a nurse administrating it. So if that's the case, and all of these RA patients that are on Simponi subcutaneous can go and get it in the IV form, wouldn't that completely eliminate the need for your program for rheumatoid arthritis patients?
Right, yeah, so Janssen has 2 products currently, right? They have Remicade and they also have Simponi. So Simponi entered the market as a subcutaneous, and a lot of the marketing strategy behind that was to address, because for face value, presenting with patients, if you're comparing Remicade and Humira, a lot of patients were kind of hesitant to hear that they have to go into an infusion clinic for 2 to 3 hours every couple of months, and obviously would prefer to have the convenience of taking it at home. So that's where Simponi came in. And speaking with Dr. Keystone specifically, he found that patients that were already on an infusion-based therapy loved it for those reasons, and that they have that established community. But those with subcutaneous haven't been exposed to that yet, and so still preferred the convenience of at home. So it would be kind of difficult in our perspective to convince patients of the benefits of infusion over the convenience of why they took it in the first place.
This might be out of scope. It's just a personal interest question, but do you know, is there like a biologic or physiological reason that a patient would have to go to infusion as opposed to get a subcutaneous route of administration? Do you guys know that? That might be out of scope.
I think specifically with rheumatoid arthritis patients, they sometimes have difficulty grasping the needle or the self-injector, and so that's one reason why they might need to have it
so
go to
simply like ability.
Yeah, yeah.
More?
Well, if you want. Yeah.
This is just my personal interest. We can probably.
So, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What was the question again? Specifically, it was.
Why, like, is there any other reason, like physiologically or like biologically, that a patient would be better suited to the infusion clinic? Like, how the drug administered via.
Yeah, a lot of it, again, is just sort of what's established in the literature, like when Humira and Remicade came out. So physicians are more prone to prescribing one of those 2, and sometimes we'll even give it up to the patient just so that you can choose which one.
And also we found that if injection site reactions are a specific issue for one patient, that's actually more common or greater risk if you're doing infusion just because you're getting it for 3 hours compared to 1 needle. So that could be one reason why someone would switch from one to the other. In terms of Simponi, we really were just to do it in terms of the injectable version, and I don't know the numbers, but not that many people are really doing infusion because they would be using Remicade.
Hey guys, thanks for your talk. I just had a quick question. So I like how you guys started off kind of by showing the competitor landscape. Did you guys look at what the support program entails for Enbrel, for Humira? Because I would have liked to have seen that to see what your competition is doing.
Yeah.
I don't think we have it, but you can just say.
No. I don't know if we have a specific slide. We did at one point, but got rid of it. But for patients, the support program for Enbrel, I believe, is just an educational support instead of a assistance. So in terms of relative compliance, one thing that we found was that there's not a strong association between the support program that you have and your relative compliance. So for example, patients on Simponi or Remicade, they have the same available support through BioAdvance, right? However, they have completely different relative compliance rates. Remicade is much more, it has a higher rate. It's the best in class example. And so we found that the support program that's available is not directly correlated to the relative compliance.
Okay, and can you tell me what the role of a BioAdvance coordinator is?
Specifically, is just to organize the patient support and the features that are available through the program.
Okay, does that entail a nurse
Yeah.
support program? So just looking quickly, I saw that each one of your competitors has like a 24/7 nurse on call to answer a question that a patient has. Is that part of BioAdvance as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So why don't you guys think of potentially reducing your costs instead of making this whole new program? Why not just add that on? So maybe like just from previous support programs, you could have that number maybe in that pamphlet, right? Contact your nurse to talk more about going on to BioAdvance. That would save the physician a lot of time. He's definitely not going to take the time out to explain a whole new support program. Why don't you just maybe add that on, maybe give that to the nurse, for example, and have the nurse then follow up and say, here's some education.
Yeah, sure.
Would that reduce your cost?
Yeah.
So yes, that's a good point. However, we're introducing the patient-to-patient support program since it's a lot more personable. I mean, that's something we did consider, just having a nurse they are always there to answer questions and provide support, but we felt that patients would feel more comfortable talking to another patient who's in the exact same situation as them. I mean, a lot of patients aren't going to call up the nurse. That might be too intimidating as well. So just sending a text or an email to your sidekick would be a lot more personable.
So maybe what if you did that for, let's say, you had it as the nurse, and then maybe let the patient and receivers do that.
The features that are already available to patients would still exist after implementation of the Simponi Sidekick program. So if a patient had serious concerns about their medication, for example, they could still call that hotline and get the information, not necessarily contact their sidekick for that.
So I'm just wondering, what's the problem with Simponi? Is it the fact that they're not administering the drug, or is it the fact that they're not picking up the prescription?
So there's no real way to know that. As Mike sort of mentioned, compliance is a very complex issue, and the only way they can really measure it right now is through prescription claims. So have they filled their medication? And obviously, yes, that doesn't tell you if they're actually injecting. And by questionnaires, and then those are biased at some point. So it wasn't really clear whether it's the actual injection or not. Something that suggests that it could be the actual injection is just the anxiety surrounding self-injection, but again, it's not absolutely clear.
That was was one of the things we were thinking of a lot, especially when we were trying to make those definitions. And the conclusion we came to was that if you were to actually fill your prescription, you take it home, it stays in your fridge, and you don't take it, yes, you're technically compliant because you did fill your prescription, but you're probably less likely or not likely at all to do it the next month and then actually go and fill your prescription because you've kind of just fallen into the non-compliant category by not taking your drug. You're probably not going to go and spend $1,400 the next month to go through that process again. So even though that 1 month is, yeah, you bought it, it's in your fridge, you're probably going to become a non-compliant patient based on our definitions pretty quickly. If that makes sense.
Also, I do have a big challenge with your advertising expense. You said it was only $5,000. And with projects and organizations that derive their value from establishing networks, there's a tremendous upfront cost in actually setting up that initial pool. So I mean, yeah, you may need $5,000 later on just to maintain enrollment, but I don't think that $5,000 allocation is, it's doing, I think it's misrepresentation. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so the reason why the cost of advertisement is so low is because the Simponi Psychic program is not a separate program. It's almost like an add-on to the BioAdvance program. So when patients are notified about BioAdvance, it will be included in, I guess, the information brochure. So in that aspect, yes, $5,000 is really low for initial advertisement of the program. However, we believe that because it's not a separate program, there doesn't need to be that much cost spent on advertising it as a separate program. Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah, it's just distinction between advertising in order to get enrollment of that mentor group versus advertising of getting, new people into that pool, essentially. So I think there should be more costs associated with advertising, especially to up the enrollment for the mentors. And I mean, that's the entire purpose of your premise. It's to get those mentors to, hold the person's hand through this process. So I think that could have been represented a bit better in your analysis.
Great presentation, guys. I just had a quick question. Say I was on Simponi and I developed an adverse event or like such as immunogenicity and I need to be switched to a competitor's product. Do I all of a sudden lose my sidekick because I'm no longer on Simponi and no longer on the program? And if not, would you guys have to start managing all these other X patients that are no longer taking the medication?
Well, we're really hoping that through this program we just establish friendships. So once you stop taking the drug, you can still be friends afterwards. So that's really what we were hoping to get out of this.
Would it be easier to, facilitate or manage such a program through more of like a patient advocacy group rather than do it strictly through Janssen? Do it through a group that looks at rheumatoid arthritis specifically, and then it can you can still almost partner with other companies and still overall have better compliance because everyone would have different buddies. They might be on different medications per se, but maybe you would have more of that long-term friendship.
I mean, yeah, this is obvious. That's a great point. Like, this is a starting point, and we hope that those type of issues would be addressed once it becomes established. But we really looked at the short term for how this program would work out.
Just one last question. I'm just trying to understand the problem here, and do you have any specific numbers to Simponi relative to the compliance rate? Because I think the only numbers you have are compliance to anti-TNFs. Do you have anything that has just Simponi already? Because obviously Janssen has that days for carrying, or sorry, the application you had that increases compliance already. So is there anything specific just to Simponi to say that this is the actual problem we're trying to address? These are the people that maybe these are the people that are forgetting. Do you have or break it down by age group just specific to Simponi?
So that 77% that we used in our financial model was from a study done specifically on Simponi users. As far as age group separation, was there anything on that? Okay.
As far as compliance data goes in general, a lot of companies are hesitant to publish this type of data, mainly because of the implications it has with insurance. So no company wants to say only 20% of our patients are actually taking our drug. So that type of data is not easy to come by, and the stuff that is most available is typically the ones that are most established, like Remicade.
Thank you.
Guys, what I'm going to do is we're going to thank the presenting team, and then I'm going to have a bit of a 5-minute wrap-up for the class. So first off, I'd like to thank the presenting team for their... Thank you, guys. Go ahead and grab a seat.